Pioneers. We were unique. We were restless pursuers of our dreams. It was the year 2002 when Blizzard Entertainment released the strategy game Warcraft 3, along with a powerful editing tool that would allow players to create their own custom modifications. What started out as one game turned into thousands. But it was only one of them that stood out. A young individual by the name of Yule picked up on ideas of previous modifications and created his own. He called it Dota, Defense of the Ancients.
Dota was a mod or a custom map to Warcraft 3, and I think it went as far back as the early Aeon of Strife to StarCraft and everything, so it's probably been there a lot longer than just starting in 2003, but that's where it started gaining popularity.
Dota came from a community which had a whole lot of different games, and then they just came up with this wonderful mode. Like, it's just the simplest thing in the world to have Fortress versus Fortress and a couple of heroes in between. And when Dota All-Stars came together, it was a combination of all of these different types of ideas that people had around this game mode and piled it all into one big thing which has been refined over the years.
The idea behind Dota was adapted by many others who created their own different versions of it. Some even combined the many into one. But each of them only worked on it for a short period of time, leaving it for others to continue. It wasn't until 2005 that it rapidly gained popularity, when yet another individual called Ice Frog picked up the development and took the chance to devote his life to the game. But what made his work so successful, as opposed to all the others who had tried their best before him? He listened, talking to hundreds of different people every day, asking questions, seeking advice. He skillfully condensed the feedback to produce the game the community wished for.
The one outstanding feature Dota has is the fact that there's one guy working on it who's in very close contact with especially the professional scene, but also has an entire team of beta testers, Ice Frog. And he's always monitored the competitive scene, especially very closely to find out what works, what doesn't work, and he continuously released these new updates that make sure that the game is balanced, the game is fun, the meta game develops and everything. And I think that's a big integral part of why this game is so much more successful than a lot of other games, even though there was technically no developer behind it for the longest time, only for the past 4 years or so. And he still managed to get a bigger player base than most other titles.
While the community around Dota grew into the millions worldwide, its commercial success remained in the dark. The hard evidence that these player numbers existed was missing. But the community kept believing and did its best to push the game towards being accepted by the public.
A bunch of online tournaments at the time then started to get interested in Dota and realized that there was a big market here that was unexplored, but it wasn't an e-sport the same way Counter-Strike or Warcraft and so forth were.
During Dota 1 days for tournaments, they were very, very sporadic. I think the only consistent thing that was out there was Farm for Fame and the Dota League. But that was all European Dota. In Southeast Asia, we had something called the Asian Dota Championships, which was played a lot. Like that was probably, I think it was 2 or maybe 3 times a year. and it would run for roughly 2.5 months each time it would go. But that also means there's a lot of downtime.
So outside of DreamHack and then ESWC, there wasn't many LAN tournaments, so that when Dota League announced their Dota League Masters taking place in Hanover, every team wanted to go, every top European team wanted to go, despite the fact that we only played for, I think, €1,000 or something. But this was really how much the teams really wanted to compete. It was all about the passion for the game and wanting to be the best. It didn't matter how much cash were on the line back then. So I think the true juggernauts of that time, King Surf International, SK Gaming, MYM, and so forth were there. There were teams from the Czech Republic, and we had teams from France and everything. There was teams from all over Europe, and it had the very best teams of Europe as well. Just playing for, 1,000 for first place that I believe went to King Surf International. Some stars of today are actually from that team, or at least Kuroki is. I can't remember any other players, maybe Poppy as well. Now playing on Team Secret. And then I took second place with MYM. We had Hani, who has been on Fnatic for the longest time, and I think all the other players of that lineup has now retired since then. And then SK Gaming, of course, with Loda and Ake. So there's definitely a lot of high-profile players of today that were as good back then. They were on top back then, and they're on top now, and they've stuck with the game for the past decade.
Without a publisher and just a private individual behind it, no one in the scene was able to make any money. Community websites could make a few $100s through advertisements, which was just enough to pay the servers, but it took hundreds of volunteers to keep them running. And especially the players who saw their chance in competing professionally were struggling.
Well, back then there was no money to be made, right? I just played the game because I enjoy it. That was the most important thing. I don't think you can go into something and you can't go into the music industry and say, I want to make money with it. It's the way it works is the most successful people, they really love doing music, and then they just start doing money with it. It's just how it goes.
The teams never really had big enough sponsors. Esports was never big enough that you'd have some big company come to you and say, okay, we will pay $2,000 a month to every player that has their badge, our logo as a badge on their shoulder. These days that can happen, but back in those days it was almost impossible.
By the time Dota 2 hit the community, I think I had student loans for around $30,000.
We made no money when we first started commentating. We spent so much. It's not like these days when you've got things like Twitch, who will give you money for streaming. And they take care of all the server hosting and everything else like that. And it's like, well, just keep playing adverts and we'll give you a share of the revenue which is created. The server costs back then were insane. Even just the audio servers. You were paying a substantial amount a month just to have these servers up, even if you weren't using them. And then the video servers, you paid by the bandwidth. So the more people that watched, the greater it was for you, because you're like, yes, we've got more people watching, but 20 people could suck your video server dry. And you're like, well, okay, I've now just managed to spend like $10,000 in the space of 2 weeks because people are watching my video live stream, where you would pray you can get $10,000 worth of revenue when people are watching your stream these days.
But money was not the only issue. The game's technology had grown old over the years, and IceFrog was limited to the Warcraft 3 engine, letting him improve and develop Dota only so far.
That was hard times. When someone disconnected from the game, there was no reconnect option like we have nowadays. So that was pretty tough.
And something that if you've been in the game for a long time, you can definitely remember the atrociousness of having to play on a server located in New York, for instance, when you're a European and you're playing in 2005. That would be a horrendous experience.
It wasn't until October 2010 5 years after IceFrog had picked up Dota, that the loud calls of the community would resonate through the internet. IceFrog and Valve announced the successor, Dota 2. It meant the world to everyone involved.
I think the most important change that Dota 2 brought with it was the recognition and acceptance outside of what Valve was doing. So suddenly you have all these esports organizations who want to pick you up. There's tons of sponsors with a keen interest in the game just because of the sheer publicity and the fact that Valve, one of the biggest publishers in the world, suddenly is developing the game and everything. So everyone was jumping on the Dota train. So Counter-Strike were talking about it, Warcraft were talking about it, StarCraft was talking about it, everyone was talking about it. And I felt that this was a monumental point in my career where I could finally, be proud of the game I played and show the world that this game deserves every bit as much recognition as any other title in the esports hemisphere.
While the community and professional players were used to Dota 1 for almost 8 years, Dota 2 was just over a year and a half into development at Valve. The new visuals and gameplay had a different feel than the original Dota, and the community's first reactions were mixed.
So a lot of people were really disappointed with, my hero doesn't look like it should, or these things in the map should be a little bit different, or I'm disappointed with this, and this. And at the beginning, the game got a lot of criticism and people seemed to not like it, and a lot of people said, we will never switch to Dota 2. This is not like our good old game.
I remember the Skeleton King one was the most hilarious one. The Hellfire Blast ability was literally a skeleton farting. Like, that was his first ability icon, and they had so much fun with these initial things. I actually kind of like the initial joke ones that they made more than I do the current ones right now. But it was really funny because they just have the Valve placeholders. It was quirky, it was funny, it was all this kind of jazz.
When I first got bad at Key, I was sitting in my studio in Cyber Arena in Kiev, and I was not allowed to show the game to anyone. I signed DNA, but of course I showed it to our stream director, to Alexander, and we were sitting together downloading Dota, and we were like in closed studio, and we launched Dota. It was like, wow, the first game I played was just started the game. I chose the Leshrac, and it was like, oh my god. It was so terrible, like all the trees were so bad, all the graphics were so bad. And I played 15 minutes and closed Dota, like, okay, forget about it, it's a bad game and they're not gonna make it much more better. But 1, 2, 3 more months, more weeks, and before TI 1 it was actually playable and even watchable.
But the announcement that Valve made in August 2011 swept everyone off their feet. $1 million in prize money for the first place of a computer game tournament. It felt like it was Valve's way of saying thank you to the community that worked so hard for so many years. They had turned Dota 1 into Dota 2 and showed it to the public for the very first time. The International.
The International really grew out a conversation between people on the Dota 2 team. IceFrog thought it would be a good idea if we tried it out. And we tried to think of how you reward people for the different things they bring. And it seemed like the professional players were generating a lot of value for the community. So the International One grew out of that idea of how can we return to them some of what they've already given to the community.
I can kind of remember a meeting where we're like, well, how are we going to show this game off to people now that we're ready to ship it? And then somebody probably said, I wonder if we could run a tournament. And then somebody probably said, let's make the prize pool really big. And it just kind of grows from there. Next thing you know, a designer's coming up with a name for it and building graphics, and then we're on a plane to Germany.
When I first heard about the International, there was like this sense of euphoria because it wasn't just, even if it was $50,000, I'd be like, wow, that's really, really cool. I can't wait to play for this. Then they announced that it was $1.6 million, and you were just like, what?
There was literally no money to be made, and suddenly there was millions to be won. It was crazy back then. I remember people went crazy over it.
It was huge money in esport. Nobody could even understand that that's for real. That's real, 1 million. So for me, it was something incredible. I needed like 2 or 3 days to actually believe in this.
I think the most enjoyable part was not the announcement of it or the fact that we had something to look forward to. It was participating in the actual tournament that really stood out to me because of the attention it got, but also the treatment that you received from Valve, and everything ran very smoothly and very professionally. And you know, the first international was at Gamescom, and you had everyone just standing in huge amounts of crowds outside of the booth, just trying to get a glimpse of this $1 million tournament, but also the new title coming up from Valve.
Well, it's flattering to think that people would think that we actually knew what was going to happen. We absolutely didn't. We looked at it reasonably simply. This was a really fun thing for us. Our fans seemed to really enjoy it. Let's just kind of keep investing in it and see where it would take us. As we met more people from the professional scene and kind of watched the Dota 2 scene building up, gave us a lot of inspiration and ideas. So we're really watching the community and pulling all of our inspiration from that and trying to build on to the next event.
A lot of people who come into it now might not realize, because they see these tournaments and they're like, wow, there's so much money, so the players are playing for a living, which of course we are at this point. But back then, for us, it was a hobby that we took to the next level.
Right now, there are so many more avenues. It's not only teams providing salaries, which is of course really good for the players because they get this safety net even if they're not performing really well, but also they can create item sets that net people money. Item sets can get 6 figures if something does well, so sometimes you can, as a player, some players could potentially make more money out of selling items than from winning prize tournaments, right? And from that you can actually get a sustainable income as well.
Dota started as an idea, a custom idea, which developed into a community, which then developed into a competitive community, which has now developed into an industry.
Nowadays, you can actually make a living out of it. Player, organizer, whoever you are, if you want to be part of esports, if you're ambitious, you can actually make a living out of it nowadays. So it's definitely a success.